quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War. This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, March 17th, 2025, the 57th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Can't believe I said it was the 19th. That doesn't even make sense. Wednesday, I'll say that. It'll make total sense. So we've been gone for a few days. I was not able to get an episode in Thursday or Friday. I've kind of been running myself ragged between doing the show, heading to GART, doing the show, dealing with some stuff in my personal life, all good stuff. But we are back to normal schedule this week. Wednesday, the live stream will be at 3 p.m. for paid Substack subscribers. It will be streamed on Substack as we did last week. A couple of people had a hard time adjusting, but it was really only a couple. And it turned out that a lot of people actually watched it over there. So the overall audience for the subscriber stream basically did more than double. So I think that's good. And to those people who are accustomed to being on Rumble and being in the chat and participating in that, I apologize for the change in format. It is only for those Wednesday shows. And then it will stream as I did yesterday on the following Sunday for everyone, again, as a kind of live replay. And so if people want to get in the chat on that, some people were in there yesterday. That's awesome. I think that's it for updates and whatnot. Happy St. Patrick's Day to the Irish out there. I am a big fan of your lands and your great history and your castles and whatnot. I'm also a fan of Conor McGregor, partly because I'm such a fan of Ireland. And I know many people are not fans of Conor McGregor, but Conor was at the White House today. Here he is.
Happy Paddy's Day, America.
How about that? Happy Paddy's Day, America. I guess the saint is implied. Here is Conor McGregor in the Oval Office with Donald J. Trump. So a nice little highlight for this St. Patrick's Day. And let's get into the political happenings. So on Friday, we had, or I should, let me start back just a step further. Throughout the week, we talked about Mike Johnson's package, the big, beautiful package that absolutely must be passed or else our government would shut down. Trump said that he wanted it passed, said that many times over many weeks, made it very clear that Donald Trump and MAGA would not be angling for a government shutdown, even while he was putting impossible standards in place that people would not get behind, like balancing the budget. Should be a normal one, but no, it's not. So that was going to be too much. He wanted the CR not only to be extended for a few months, as the Freedom Caucus members were expressing they wanted, but all the way to September. It's going to include all sorts of money for all of these Trump agenda items. It had to be passed. Thomas Massie was the only one to speak up in the House and say he was not going to vote for it. Donald Trump called him a grandstander and castigated him throughout the weekend. Now we've had another sifting operation with many of the people in the Ron DeSantis simp op going all in for Thomas Massie. Same is true of many of the Maha people who aligned their interests with Donald Trump and MAGA for a time so that they could, not be publicly supporting Kamala, hopefully get RFK Jr. in there. He's going to fix the public health crisis, etc. The problems with our food, that hasn't happened yet, but hopefully it will sometime. Anyhow, it was very clear who would go adamantly anti-Trump because they actually have priorities that are far ahead of MAGA and far ahead of Donald Trump. All of these people, of course, think that they are far smarter than Donald Trump. They have the entire time. And we've talked about this at long length on episodes. If you want to hear the full argument, you can go back a couple years to an episode called Aligned Interests. And we talked about it so much throughout the Ron DeSantis simp op. So it passed through the House without Thomas Massie's help, and it went to the Senate. And then, so we did the last episode on Wednesday. On Thursday, we were told that Chuck Schumer was going to go ahead and push for the passage of the big, beautiful package, courtesy of Mike Johnson, in line with Donald Trump's agenda. Trump was the one who wanted it passed. He got it pushed through the House. So now it's on Senate Democrats to choose whether or not to side with Republicans and Donald Trump in order to prevent the government shutdown, which is essentially the opposite dynamic of what we've seen in the past, which is Republicans using the government shutdown as a leverage point and Democrats then pushing it through, getting some of those centrist, moderate, aka Rhino Uniparty right Republicans to join on with them and keep the government open, because it's always, we got to keep the government open at all costs. So they were put in a bind. Is Chuck Schumer or the Democrat senators going to align with Trump and Republicans in order to keep the government open, or are they going to do what their base wants? A lot of their base didn't want the government to stay open. They wanted the government shut down. They don't want to go with Donald Trump. And I'm talking about the younger side, the kind of AOCs and the like. And our boy Schu, I know it's not comfortable. Our boy True, our boy New, our boy Yoo-hoo, none of them are comfortable, but they all do seem to be under control and doing as told to destroy their own side. And I don't think we're going to probably end up getting to the Gavin Newsom, our boy New podcast and his discussion with Steve Bannon. Very interesting. I suggest everyone listen to it. He's placed himself in a very weird position. I guess he's trying to vie for whatever centrists he thinks he might be able to scrape off from their nascent Donald Trump support. Who knows? It's not comfortable to like any of these people or suggest that they are doing work on our behalf. The same thing is true of the comedic actor in Ukraine. And, at this point, I should say, a lot of people have come to terms with the fact that many of our enemies, as described throughout our lives, are not our actual enemies, and that our actual enemies are the representatives in this country and elsewhere of the global regime, the Uniparty in America. Those are our actual enemies. Now, these people have all been Uniparty members, and so they are ultimately enemies. But if they are under control and doing as told, or if they are just game theoried into a corner and have no choice but to do as told or to do what we need them to do, it's all the same thing. Chuck Schumer essentially destroyed, in some sense, the standing of the Democrat Party. And that's been the big story for today. Let's get to that in a second. This is ABC News from this morning. With Democrats' help, Senate votes to avert a government shutdown. The Senate passed a House-approved government funding bill that averts a government shutdown that was set to be triggered at the end of the day Friday. The Senate voted 54 to 46 to pass the bill. The approval of the bill follows several Democrats voting with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to keep the funding bill moving forward despite blowback from other members of their party. Senator Angus King, an independent who caucuses with other Democrats, and Senator Jeanne Shaheen voted in favor of the bill. All other Democrats voted against it. Senator Rand Paul was the only Republican to cast a vote against the bill. Okay, that's interesting. So we have Thomas Massie of Kentucky voting against it in the House, and we have Rand Paul, also of Kentucky, voting against it in the Senate. Leaving their affiliations aside and their loyalties aside and all the rest of that, the fact that we have people on the Republican side going in the other direction against Trump allows for the argument to take place internally, not just a partisan thing, but for Republicans to argue against other Republicans. People making strong points about why we should shut down the government, because the government's illegitimate, because the money is fake. Most people are not saying that. Either of those things. They're saying that this is too expensive and our debt is way too high. Now, it is too expensive. The debt is way too high. The program shouldn't be funded, but it's also illegitimate. And we are also at war with the bankers. And when you're at war with the bankers and you defeat the bankers, then you don't owe them money afterwards. Okay, so those points, as far as I'm concerned, are irrelevant, but the argument is still good to have. And so it was had by virtue of these people voting against Trump and against the Mike Johnson's package in the House and the Senate. I think that dynamic is important, and I think that we've seen that pattern play out a number of times before. Earlier, 10 Senate Democrats provided the necessary votes to allow a test vote to advance. Democrats voted with Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to keep the funding bill moving forward despite blowback from other members of their party. And then many of them chose not to vote for the actual passage of the bill. They just did the thing that made the bill's passage possible, but they don't have their names on it. And this is just the ridiculous uniparty illusion that we have been subjected to for our entire lives. I know a lot of members didn't like the CR. The government shutdown would be far worse. A government shutdown gives Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Doge almost complete power to close down because they can decide what is an essential service, Schumer said on CNN between the votes. My job as leader is to lead the party, and if there's going to be danger in the near future, to protect the party, and I'm proud I did it. So Chuck Schumer aligns with Donald J. Trump and Republicans. And unfortunately, now we still have an open government where we could have had a shut down government. Better. But it wasn't to be, at least not this time. So do we have essentially like Groundhog Day with this government shutdown issue, and we're just going to keep the government open until the project is completed? Is that really going to be in September? 6 more months from now? Will people accept that? And that is always the question, because what matters is what people will accept. Let us go to Morning Mika. This is the reaction that the TV is pushing forward.
Let's start with the new polling that shows the Democratic Party has reached an all-time low in popularity. The latest NBC News national poll finds that a majority of registered voters, 55%, have a negative view of the party, while 27%, just over a quarter of registered voters, have a positive view of the party. That's the party's lowest rating in NBC News polling dating back to 1990. Meanwhile, though, a new CNN SSRS poll finds the Democratic Party's favorability rating at just 29%, a record low going back to 1992, and a drop of 20 points since January of 2021. What's more, Just 63% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents have a favorable view of their own party, down 9 points from January and 18 points from the start of the Biden administration.
So the Democrat Party is losing all of its support, and this is being told to the American public. Now, polls are fake. Whatever the numbers are, they're far worse for them than that. The polls have always been fake. There's no way to fix the polling. It's going to be fake. That said, it is important that the narrative is going out, that the Democrats are losing all of their support. It continues to confirm Donald Trump's vast and overwhelming, obvious mandate from the American people, which is the only thing that can give a government legitimacy, which makes Donald Trump a legitimate leader, despite the fact that our elections are fake, and Trump continues to say so. I believe he actually said so in the DOJ speech the other day, and I didn't pull that up. I meant to. Let me see if I can find it just real quickly, because this is the sort of thing to be said before the American public and the Department of Justice. That seems like it should probably matter coming from a president.
The courts are a big factor. The elections, which were totally rigged, are a big factor. We have to have honest elections. We have to have borders, and we have to have courts and law that's fair. Well, we're not going to have a country crooked.
And he's right. If we don't have elections and courts and borders, we're not going to have a country. And we're going to talk about all those things today. So Donald Trump's mandate is confirmed again and again and again. And the mainstream media is also confirming Donald Trump's mandate. Now, I think that what they're attempting to do is push aside this old generation of Democrats and Uniparty members in general, so that they can bring up these young people and have them be the ones who are making the noise that people will listen to, because it's clear that even if people like Chuck Schumer and some of these other dinosaurs in the House and Senate, even if they're not totally controlled, whatever it is, they are not doing the thing that is going to give anyone a reassurance that the Democrats have even a fighting chance to be anything close to a 50-50 party. Trump actually had, well, let me first show you this on Trump's Truth Social. This is from this morning, in addition to the poll that Morning Mika just showed. This is David Chalian, who Steve Bannon always remembers as the guy on CNN who was groveling over Joe Biden on the night of the fake inauguration in 2021, talking about the lights along the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C., representing Joe Biden's arms outstretched and embracing America into his new unifying pull, I guess. I don't know. Trump's policies will move the U.S. in the right direction or wrong direction. This among the not the State of the Union, the speech before the joint session of Congress. 66% right direction, 34% wrong direction. That is not some slight difference. Let me find this other Donald Trump post, because he actually had, hopefully I'll find it quickly here. Here it is. Hold for processing. So this is from late last night, random Twitter account. The caption is Kings, and we have the GOP elephant, the DNC donkey, and then we have a lion in a suit wearing a crown that says MAGA. So is Donald Trump king of the world, as I keep saying? Well, he keeps saying it too. Yes or no? I don't know. We'll find out one day, or we won't. But it's quite clear that the British Commonwealth is collapsing and that Donald Trump is about to rule over all of North America. So I don't know what that means, unless we're getting dog walked into that deep, deep dystopia. And I don't think that's what's happening. What would be the point of the awakening otherwise? Why would Donald Trump be a catalyst to awakening so many people? If we were just being dog walked into that dystopia? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If somebody answers that question in a way that is convincing, maybe I will change my mind. But right now, it seems pretty clear. So the polls are all going in our direction right now, further confirming Donald Trump's mandate. And it's becoming unavoidable, even for people in the mainstream who do not really pay any attention at all. And the good thing is that once people understand that everybody else understands Donald Trump is the legitimate president of the United States with an obvious and overwhelming mandate from the people, then they understand that Donald Trump's words will carry additional weight. And MSNBC was having a meltdown over that this morning as well. And Chris Matthews has figured it out. He talks about Donald Trump. He's called it a campaign. He said Donald Trump goes out on the air every day and hammers his message, and people believe him. And then, of course, he says that Trump supporters just mindlessly lap it all up and then repeat it. Everybody's a bunch of automatons. I get it. We're not the academic elites who know that Donald Trump is wrong all the time while actually being right all the time and destroying these people, which is part of the proof that he's right. They don't believe that truth can be discerned by normal people. They believe truth comes from the top-down centralized and centralizing authorities who pass it down to people like Chris Matthews. And then it's his job to pass it down to us, and we're supposed to believe him and repeat the things he says, like automatons or Democrats or any brand of standard issue villager at this point. The reality, the false reality, is breaking down. It's collapsing. And as the false reality collapses, it becomes easier for Donald Trump to disclose what's coming next, to disclose critical pieces of information that the American public has been blind to, ignorant of, however you would like to say it. And we mentioned one of these examples last week in our discussion of the Autopen. And to recap, the week before, Andrew Bailey, the Attorney General of Missouri, asked the DOJ to begin an investigation into the legitimacy of Joe Biden's actions as president due to his dementia. And we discussed how that was a cover story, potentially, to either disclose step by step the illegitimacy of Biden's presidency or to cover it up, so that the legitimacy of Biden's presidency is not what's questioned, which then means the election system collapses once people realize that Joe Biden wasn't actually president and didn't actually win an election. And so if you want to preserve the system while still nullifying the actions of Joe Biden, you would need a cover story in order to do that. And these sorts of half measures can be read as limited hangouts if down the road we see that the story doesn't advance beyond them. Okay, so that's something we can't judge right now. It's important to look at it both ways as reality emerges, and we'll see how things go. So after the dementia, that was kind of the opening salvo, then we began to hear about the Autopen and how Joe Biden's signature on a number of important documents were executed by Autopen. Trump posted this yesterday, which I find hilarious. Here is Trump in the first term. Ah, big smile. Here is the second term president. That is what we are supposed to take from this, I assume. And that is Joe Biden's Autopen. Joe Biden's Autopen was president in the second term. And it's funny, Trump said, maybe the DOJ speech, I'm not sure exactly which speech, but he said that whoever was in control of the Autopen, president. Let me see if I can find it just quickly. This Twitter transcript on YouTube video, or YouTube transcript on videos, is just the greatest thing. Let's do this. Here we are. Hold for processing.
Biden got us into a real mess with Russia and everything else he did, frankly, but he didn't know about it. And he, generally speaking, signed it with Autopen. So how would he know that Autopen is a big deal? I don't know. You know, they're having who's doing this? So when my people come up, Will and all of the people, Steve, they come up and, sir, this is an executive order. They explain it to me. And, you know, 90% of the time I sign it, 99% of the time I say do it. But they come up and I sign it. But you don't use Autopen. It's, number one, it's disrespectful to the office. Number two, maybe it's not even valid because, you know, who's getting him to sign? He had no idea what the hell he was doing. If he did, all of these bad things wouldn't be happening right now. But we're going to get you back into a great position.
Who is president in that second term? According to Trump's Truth Social post, it was the Autopen. And then, of course, now we have Donald Trump in what is essentially the mugshot picture, repurposed and edited as, well, I guess it's not quite, is it the mugshot? No, it's not quite the mugshot picture. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge of that. It's very mugshot picture-y, but maybe the scowl is not, the scowl's not the same, I don't think. Here, take a look for yourself. I kind of had it in my head that it was the mugshot picture, but similar scowl, but I don't think they're the same now. Upon another glance, I don't know, it's hard to say. Anyhow, Trump presidency, Autopen presidency, Trump presidency. Trump said whoever's in control of that Autopen was the real president. And I had the speech wrong. I will find it one of these days and I will show it to you. And now that I'm saying that, I want to look at Telegram and see if I was able to, if I'm able to, I should say, if I am able to find it. I'm speaking terribly. Oh, it's good to be back. All right. Well, we're gonna leave that alone for now. And we're just gonna continue on. So the Autopen was the president for the pause term, for the devolution term, for the last 4 years. Who was in control of the Autopen? Joe Biden kept Trump's tariffs in place. Joe Biden re-upped executive orders like 13848. There were many things that Joe Biden did that were totally in line with what Trump had done in his prior term. And in fact, Joe Biden, in his fake State of the Union speeches, would talk about MAGA agenda issues occasionally, like the MAGA version of a Democrat. And of course, the political analysis would say he was trying to appeal to those people who are MAGA friendly about certain issues, but not supporters of Donald Trump and want another option who will actually support the issues they care about. And so that makes sense. And that's a fine explanation if only Joe Biden was a real president. And of course, he's not a real president. But let us continue. This was Donald Trump in a very, very interesting, quite an interesting little appearance on Air Force One last night, speaking to the media. There are a few clips from this we'll play throughout the episode.
The Autopen, it looked like we had an Autopen for a president, and we would have been better off if we had, probably. But it looks to me like, you know, that's a big subject. I'm sure you won't ask about that, but
I know that's really quiet. I wonder if that's too quiet. I apologize for the quietness. It's impossible to know how these clips will come up. Perhaps I can find a better version quickly on YouTube. And if I can, then I will be able to give you Some timestamps. Okay, let's try this. Let's try this. Hold for processing and apologies. Here we are. Here is the first of these.
That Biden and his people is probably Autopen. It looked like we had an Autopen for a president. We would have been better off if we had, probably. But it looks to me like, you know, that's a big subject. I'm sure you won't ask about that. But the whole subject of Autopen, did he know what he was doing? Did he authorize it? Or is this somebody in an office, maybe a radical left lunatic, just signing whatever that person was? That's not what it's all about. I never use it. I mean, we may use it as an example to send some young person a letter. It's nice, you know, we get thousands and thousands of letters and letters of support for young people, for people that aren't feeling well, etc. But to sign pardons and all of the things that he signed with an Autopen is disgraceful.
Mr. President, as markets and consumers continue to react to tariffs, as markets and consumers react to tariffs.
So that's Autopen number one. The people in the chat are saying they could hear the videos, so that is good. And here is Autopen video number two.
Are those executive orders, those pardons from the former president now null and void?
Well, I think so. It's not my decision. That'll be up to a court. But I would say that they're null and void.
Just to be clear, the question was the pardons that Joe Biden executed, are those null and void? And Trump says, I think so.
Because I'm sure Biden didn't have any idea that it was taking place. And somebody was using an Autopen to sign off and to give pardons to, as an example, it's just one example, but the J6 Unselect Committee. They gave, think of it, they gave pardons with an Autopen. I don't think Biden knew anything about it. And what they did is they deleted and destroyed all of the information that took them over a year to get. And the reason they did that is because the information was very incriminating about them. Like Nancy Pelosi, it was determined conclusively that she knew about 10,000 soldiers and turned it down. And if we used 500 soldiers, you would have had no problem, let alone 10,000. The young lady that said that I grabbed these powerful young Secret Service agents by the neck. Okay? You know that was a big hoax. It was a lie. And she admitted it. And they deleted everything. So, you know, what they did is criminal. I think we're...
So Trump believes that the pardons are null and void. It's good to remember that the January 6th committee was improperly formed, did not follow the rules of the House of Representatives, did not have a ranking member from the minority, and the minority leader, who at the time was Kevin McCarthy, was not able to choose the representatives from his party to sit on that committee. And instead we got Liz Cheney and crying Adam Kinzinger. Trump posted on Truth Social this morning one of the greatest posts I have ever had the pleasure of waking up to. This is a proof on things that I personally have talked about, and a couple of my associates like Burning Bright and John Harold have talked about, and not too many people beyond that have talked about over the last few years. And I was overjoyed, as I said, to wake up and read this. Donald Trump actually had it pinned to his profile page, and then I posted about it, and then I went back to his profile page like 20 minutes later, and it was no longer pinned, which I felt was very strange. I hadn't seen him with a pinned post before. The pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the Unselect Committee of Political Thugs and many others are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect because of the fact that they were done by Autopen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. The necessary pardoning documents were not explained to or approved by Biden. He knew nothing about them and the people that did have committed a crime. Therefore, those on the unselect committee who destroyed and deleted all evidence obtained during their 2-year witch hunt of me and many other innocent people should fully understand that they are subject to investigation at the highest level. The fact is, they were probably responsible for the documents that were signed on their behalf without the knowledge or consent of the worst president in the history of our country, crooked Joe Biden. So the pardons are void, vacant, and of no further force or effect, so says Donald Trump. And the question is, does it matter that Donald Trump has said that? Do these words matter? Let us, before we discuss that, and we're going to discuss that on a few different levels. But before that, let's take a little journey into the past. The not too long ago past, the informational past. Here we have, where are we here? Here we are. This is from December 2nd of 2024, the day after Joe Biden, the fake president, signed a fake pardon for his son Hunter's potentially fake crimes. Up to real time on that informational timeline so that people are not misled into decisions with terrible consequences, like injecting themselves with a toxic experimental gene therapy that cannot protect them from a disease that cannot kill them. That's not something I want my audience to do. And a number of other people were perfectly happy to have their audiences do that, only to then later say, whoops, I guess we were wrong. We were wrong, gang. Sorry, I trusted the experts. My wife's a doctor. Okay. So Elon Musk says that Joe Biden has never really been president, which puts him in an interesting position relative to pardoning his son, Hunter Biden, does it not? How does a fake president perform a presidential pardon? Well, if you're a fake president and all of this is simply a story, of course it is, then it's not hard at all to pardon your son. What could be easier than pardoning your son as a fake president? There are literally no consequences except narratively and in the public perception. That clip obviously goes on, but let's take one more. This is from January 16th of this year. So just over 2 months ago. All lines being closed. Let's just, oh, wow. What happened there at the beginning of that? So right here, let's go right here. Oh, wait, there's Paul Sperry. Okay. Justice Department's pardon database, in spite of the, quote, full and unconditional pardon, end quote, his father, the POTUS, granted him last month. His clemency does not appear in the case files and can only be accessed through the FOIA library. Developing. How could it be? Say it ain't so, Paul. USA Today, this is from December 3rd and then updated December 4th of last year. President Biden, already got it wrong, bypassed Justice Department in pardoning son Hunter. Okay, so right from the beginning, when the pardons were announced, we knew the only piece of critical information, and that was that Joe Biden was a fake and illegitimate president. He was not elected. He was not certified. He was not properly inaugurated. And he never served a day as a real legitimate president of the United States of America. Didn't seem to control any of the things that a president would control. And now Trump is telling us it was the Autopen as president the entire time, with the TV just telling us stories. Donald Trump has to go along with a bunch of those stories, or maybe he's leading this thing through as an op to wake up the normies. It's probably not that. It's probably for other things. And we discussed those things on Saturday on Devolution Power Hour. We'll get into a little bit of that later on. Right from the get-go, when we hear the story that Joe Biden has pardoned people, we can know for a fact that that's fake. That's it. Okay? You know, because Joe Biden's a fake and illegitimate president, that the pardons are fake. They carry no weight. If they even exist, they carry no weight. And then, as you can see right there, in the days following, it became clear that they weren't properly filed. Then that became a big deal a month and a half later. So 2 months ago from now. And we could know then, again, that it is even clearer they are fake. They have been fake the entire time. They didn't just become fake. They've been fake the entire time. Joe Biden has been a fake and illegitimate president the entire time. And so what we have is a gap on an informational timeline. There are people who just today realized that the pardons are fake and invalid, okay? There are some people who will never hear about Donald Trump's post because they are checked out of political news, and maybe good for them, to be honest. They'll never hear about it. There are those who will ignore or deny that the pardons are fake and invalid. And for them, the informational timeline gap will continue to increase. But for everyone else, it has been 107 days between when the fake president, Joe Biden, had an Autopen sign, or maybe we're even just better off saying it has been 107 days since the television told us that Biden pardoned his son Hunter. From December 1st, 2024 to today, 107 days. So if today you come to terms with the fact that the pardons are fake, you have limited your gap on an informational timeline to 107 days. Now, to close that gap and reconcile that problem, you would have to understand that they've been fake the whole time. And then anything that evolved from the misunderstanding would have to be reconciled as well. For instance, I don't think this is a real problem, but it's being presented as one. Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger woke up and found out that they weren't actually pardoned. Now they're going to be horrified. Well, maybe if they believed that Joe Biden was a real president and had actual pardon authority. They may not have believed that. They may not have that problem at all. But that's an example of how the informational timeline would have left them in a terrible situation, because had they known that the pardons were fake, well, they would have acted in a different way, assuming that they actually believed that they were real. And this applies to all of us, because when these gaps form and we are making bad decisions based on information that is in the past and trapping us in the past with it, those decisions are necessarily going to be bad. Okay. So many of you have heard me talk about informational timelines before. We don't have to go into this at long length or anything. Go back and find an episode called The Informational Time Machine. I think that's what it's called. And this will be laid out much more clearly. Let me see if I can find this. Oh, no. It's called On Informational Time Travel from June 23rd, 2023. On informational time travel. Let's take the example of vaccines. This is a very easy one that a lot of people, I think, can totally understand. There were people who got vaccinated with the COVID vax and then later on realized that they had injected themselves with a toxic experimental substance that could not protect them from a disease that could not kill them. And so that information happened to be available the whole time. They could have known from the very day those vaccines were released that there was no way that this toxic experimental substance could protect you in any way. It could only create risk because there was no risk from the disease, unless you believe the television, which disseminated misinformation and then protected that, keeping people back in that informational past with it. There are people who found out a year, 2 years later, oh, hey, it was a really terrible idea for me to go ahead and inject myself with that toxic experimental medical product. That is the sort of terrible decision that can happen when you are trapped in an informational past. The reality has been inverted relative to that issue, the COVID vaccine. And until you have understood what the problem is, you will continue to make terrible decisions relative to that issue. Anything that touches that particular issue will be the product or will cause terrible decisions to be made. It's not simply good enough to redirect your understanding. You have to go back and reconcile how far back you could have known that, and then consider everything else, all the other decisions, all the other beliefs formed that are founded on that foundational misunderstanding. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So let's bring it back to Joe Biden, 107 days from December 1st. So we could have known the pardons are fake the entire time, not had the emotional meltdowns on TV, not believed that all the con Inc. influencers pushing all of it and our anger were actually telling us the truth. We could watch it as an info op developing, figure out whether or not the info op was a good one to wake up the normies, to convince us what was happening, to teach us lessons that we needed to know about how our society operates. We could analyze the info op as the info op rather than believing the info op, subjecting ourselves and making ourselves victim to the psyop, and then spending all our time analyzing the psyop as though it's real and what the effects of it are going to be in the real world. That traps us in an informational past. We believe something false because the television tells us, and we are not willing to check the foundations of that belief and then disregard any information from the television, from the authoritative source that conflicts with a foundational reality we can be certain about. Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. There has never been any proof to the contrary. There is no reason to believe he was ever a real or legitimate president, and that the things he did as president would ever have a lasting impact throughout American history and on into the future. That was never going to be possible. And there were under 5 people talking about this the whole time. Let us continue. So here is another timeline gap that I want to highlight as well. 1,518. That is the number of days between when Joe Biden was fake inaugurated and today. So for the last 1,518 days that people have believed Joe Biden was a real and legitimate president, they are in a gap at least this large. And the problem is that today, despite Trump giving as much proof as anyone could give that Joe Biden was never a real or legitimate president, he never had the power to sign pardons. These pardons are not invalidated because of the Autopen or because of his dementia. The pardons are fake. He is explaining step by step to the country that the pardons are fake. Or he's providing a cover story in a limited hangout, but we'll give Trump the benefit of the doubt. We don't need to give other people the benefit of the doubt, but I believe Trump deserves it. And I think a lot of you believe Trump deserves it because he has been the catalyst of this awakening, whereas the others have not been. So 1,518 days since the fake president assumed his illegitimate power, presiding over nothing on the foundational level of our government, and perhaps some authority over the operation of the administrative bureaucratic deep state? What other authority could he have possessed? Did he run the military? He didn't even seem like he knew what was going on. 1,518 days, and people today will still not take the lesson from what Trump is saying and will continue to increase the gap along an informational timeline. Now, if just today you have been convinced for the first time that Joe Biden was not a real and legitimate president at any point, then you have 1,500 some odd days to work your way back through and reconcile the fact that Joe Biden was never president and that all of those things need to be unwound. And instead of doing that, you could have just skipped the whole thing. All of it. Simply by recognizing that Joe Biden was not a real and legitimate president. And the people are the ultimate authority on that. Donald Trump's legitimacy is not derived from an election. Our elections are fake. And it is not derived from the TV telling the public that he won a fake election. Our elections are fake. Donald Trump's legitimacy is derived from the obvious and overwhelming mandate given to him by the people, which is the only way a government can be legitimate. This is true throughout political history. It used to be the definition of legitimacy, although now they have changed it. And the only thing they need to call a government legitimate is a stable government and the fact that it provides services. That's all it requires. The representatives of the people? No, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry. The people are not going to be able to have their representatives because their representatives would destabilize our government. This is really the global regime approach, and you can see it. You can pull it up. Look under international law, ask the machine. In fact, let's do it. Let's go ahead and do we'll do the little exercise here. We are going to go to perplexity. What creates legitimacy for a government? Let's say under international law. Oh, it's doing the long search. Oh, it's talking about constitutional compliance. Governments are initially assessed based on an adherence to the state's constitutional framework. Democratic representation. Interesting. This is it. You know, it always gives you slightly different answers. This is going through all sorts of stuff that is probably less relevant to our conversation, reflecting legal theories. That is annoying. The last time it asked, it was not that answer. Oh, here we go. Principles of state sovereignty, normative expectations from the global community. While international law traditionally refrains from prescribing domestic governance models, contemporary practice shows increasing consideration of both national and international legitimacy criteria. All right. We'll discuss that more in the future. I will find something better to present for you. There is no political theory that I am aware of throughout history that suggests a government can be legitimate in violation of the mandate and consent of the governed. Okay. And it's certainly not the case in our country. The consent of the governed takes primacy over everything. That is what our founders believed. The government was meant to be of, by, and for the people. Joe Biden never had a legitimate government. And we could have simply said that and convinced everyone else of that from the very beginning. We could have made that argument, but instead we groveled and we accepted Joe Biden as the president because the TV told us he was. And the TV told us we couldn't prove that Joe Biden didn't receive 81 million real lawful American votes. We needed to actually access the systems, find specific fraud, enough of it to overcome the gap that we were reported, the fake election results. We had to overcome a gap in fake results in order to call Joe Biden illegitimate. But no, we didn't. We could simply say Joe Biden's illegitimate. You know why? Because there's no proof anywhere that he received 81 million real lawful American votes. There's no proof anywhere that it's even possible for America to have produced 158 million votes, having never produced more than 131 million, especially not in the middle of a very deadly pandemic. And no one believes he won. And hey, look at that. 1 million people are in the Capitol multiple times to declare that they understand Joe Biden never won an election. But we didn't do it. We groveled. And so for 1,518 days, people have pretended that Joe Biden was a real legitimate president the whole time, though he was not. What sorts of issues came up over that time that would then need to be unwound? And it turns out it's all of them. Now, once you get to that point, people start having real problems because they say, wait a second, you mean Donald Trump was in charge of everything the entire time? Well, he was in charge of some things, or the people around him, potentially the people above him, were in charge of things during that time. Now, a lot of people think that Trump is in charge of the whole thing, and maybe he is, but also maybe he isn't, okay? Maybe he is the front-facing part of that information operation that seems to be geared at taking down the global regime and removing the control apparatus that it uses in country after country after country, which is, to repeat, control over the media, control over finances, economies, currencies, sanctions, etc., control over resources, control over trade routes, and then control over militaries, right? Once they're not able to control those things in country after country after country, then they have no way of preserving the regime rule, whether it's the American Uniparty or regime-aligned parties in countries all around the world. The legitimacy stems from the people, and we have to recognize that. That is the most important thing to understand in my mind, okay? Joe Biden was not legitimate for a single day, and we have to close these timeline gaps if we are to ever have a government of, by, and for the people. Because if we have a government that is essentially acting in correspondence to whatever's on TV at whatever time it's on, then we cannot possibly influence any part of that government because we would be totally uninformed. If the government is of, by, and for the people, then it is the people's opinion, the people's position that matters, which means it is up to us to figure out what is going on and to communicate that to other people who don't understand that. Otherwise, we are trapped within that central narrative bubble formed by the television, handed down from the authoritative source, with no hope of getting out. These are the stories that people have to understand, okay? Because analyzing everything for the last 4+ years, 4 years and 4 months, taking into account Biden's illegitimacy on every single issue the whole time, turns out to be a more productive way to have spent that time than listening to the mainstream television characters and the Con Inc. influencers on X, formerly Twitter. The case has to be made. The argument has to be won. Otherwise, we cannot move forward. It's impossible to have a country if the people are not understanding what's going on in a timeline that is anywhere close to the present. And so the people will always be subjects of their government, whoever's running that government, and they will always look up to the government as the source of their solutions when the government in its illegitimacy, the uniparty government, and the abomination of a constitutional system that we live under now, or at least we are told we live under now. That will be what rules the day. That is trying to exploit us, and we are looking to that for solutions. That is insane. Can't move forward like that. So I was surprised this morning that the mainstream media outlets were largely ignoring this Trump post. Checked Fox News, CNN, Politico, and some others, New York Times. Where is this pardon issue? Is there any coverage of this pardon issue? And I want to check up with our old gray lady, the New York Times. Here we are. Now they've got it up here on the front page. Not in a primary position. Well, a little bit below a primary position. I guess I'll try to be as fair and accurate as possible. Though there was nothing on there this morning when people woke up. This article was posted only an hour ago. Perhaps they needed to let the story develop more so that they could report on people's comments. Trump says Biden's pardons are void and vacant because of Autopen. Very short article. Wow. Wowie. Wow.
Wow. Wowie. Wow.
I love Christopher Walken. So, not much there that we haven't covered. It is now being reported, but it was not reported first thing in the morning. This seems like the stuff of absolute Democrat meltdowns, mainstream meltdowns, and it was largely ignored. And you wonder if they simply don't want to talk about it. And you may remember in one of those clips, I hope it was possible to hear it, one of those clips on Air Force One, Trump said that you don't want to report on that, addressing that to the reporters about the Autopen and the nullification of those pardons. Well, you don't want to report on that. They probably don't want to report on that because of the problem I described, not because Joe Biden's pardons are going to be overridden. The pardons were fake from the get-go. It's what it means that Joe Biden's pardons are totally null and void. Here is John Berman of CNN. Well, hopefully here's John Berman. Here we are. John Berman of CNN covering the unpardoning. And let's talk about the framing out.
After midnight, in the wee hours of the morning, President Trump puts out this social media post where he declared that the pardons that President Biden issued just before leaving office were null and void. Essentially, on social media, President Trump said he was unpardoning people that President Biden had pardoned, members of the January 6th committee, people like Anthony Fauci, presumably. So what gives here? Can you do that? Well, as you might imagine, the Constitution says nothing about unpardoning one way or the other. The pardon power is absolute in the Constitution. President Trump claims the reason that the pardons are null and void is because President Biden used an Autopen to sign them. He said because of the fact that they were done by Autopen, in other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. That's why Trump says the pardons are not valid. But you know what? The Constitution doesn't say anything about signing pardons at all. It says he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. Doesn't say anything about signing with a pen or an auto pen or with blood or with ink or whatever. It's not in the Constitution. Moreover, the Justice Department in years past under George W. Bush stated that auto pens basically have the same effect as regular pens. There's no law, period, that basically says that President Trump can unpardon anyone. It does not appear to be a thing, so say our legal analysts, but who knows?
So say our legal analysts. Okay, the argument there, George Bush's Department of Justice, not authoritative, not a law, just an opinion, says that the auto pen can be official. That's an opinion. The fact that the Constitution doesn't say anything about the process of unpardoning is totally irrelevant. It's also irrelevant that it doesn't say you can't use Autopen and doesn't mention how the pardon has to be signed. Okay. There's no way that the founders would have believed that a country of, by, and for the people would end up someday having a president who was not accountable to the people, not elected by the people, and not actually doing the job of president at all the entire time. I cannot imagine that that would have been the sort of situation that they would have written into the Constitution. But regardless of all that, we are in a post-constitutional phase. The regime inverted the Constitution, as we've discussed many times, and we'll discuss again probably in this episode. The regime inverted the Constitution 160 years ago. We are not operating under the original Constitution anyway, so we can leave that aside. But the real thing here is that Donald Trump is not unpardoning. That is a reframing of what is happening here. Donald Trump is declaring those pardons null and void. That's it. They are void. They are vacant. What was the exact language he used? Void, vacant, and of no further force or effect. Okay. So that's not going to matter at all, and he will not abide by those fake pardons. Does Trump know more than the TV characters and than we do, because the TV characters won't tell us, about the legitimacy of those pardons, or who executed those pardons, or really who began the narrative rollout that Joe Biden had executed pardons? Okay. Fake president, fake pardons, all that from the beginning. There are no pardons to be unpardoned. Donald Trump is not going through a process of unpardoning. He is telling the nation these are not real pardons. And he's saying it's because of the Autopen. Hopefully that is a stepwise progression toward the ultimate understanding that Joe Biden was never a real president. We can hope that that's true. But he's not unpardoning Joe Biden. And that needs to be understood. So this is an attempt by CNN, understanding the info up, understanding the PSYOP here. This is an attempt by CNN to suggest that Donald Trump is claiming a power for himself as presidency that he does not have, the power to override pardons from presidents prior. If we see this thing progress through the courts, and Donald Trump has even said, well, we'll let the courts decide whether they're valid or not. Oh, that's for the courts to decide. He's giving his opinion as president, and then the courts will decide. And the thing is, the courts will just be giving their opinion as courts. They don't have any way of enforcing their opinion. And if the mandate of the people is on Trump's side relative to the pardons, then there are no pardons. And Donald Trump can nullify those pardons. He would have a harder time getting the people on his side if he was to say that prior pardons not related to the Autopen, at least at this point, would be null and void. Like if he was to nullify and void George W. Bush or Bill Clinton pardons, maybe we'll get there. Maybe they didn't follow the process. Nobody, to my knowledge, has looked into that stuff. It might be an interesting and worthwhile dig. But we could get to the courts about whether or not the president actually has the power to investigate someone despite a pardon. Hunter Biden, of course, was given a total blanket pardon for everything that he did between the beginning of 2014 and essentially the end of last year. But other people have more specific pardons. They were pardoned for a crime of which they were convicted. And so they're pardoned for that specifically and could then theoretically at least be investigated for other things. That will be an interesting contest. It will also maybe provide some further opinion. And again, the court's opinion matters. The court's opinion matters in as much as it can influence legislative action and executive action and public opinion, so the public mandate forms around it. And if it's unable to do that, then the opinion doesn't matter. And we're going to get to some of that a little later as well. So this stuff will be challenged in court. And we may see something even about the unpardoning. Maybe John Berman is bringing up an issue that actually needs to be fleshed out, but that's not what Trump is doing here. Caitlin Collins addressed this to Caroline Leavitt this afternoon in the press room of the Donald Trump White House. Let us go there.
But first on the president's post overnight, saying that the pardons that were issued by President Biden preemptively to members of the January 6th committee, that they're now null and void. Have attorneys here at the White House told President Trump that he has the legal authority to undo a pardon simply because it was signed by Autopen, as he said?
The president was begging the question that I think a lot of journalists in this room should be asking about whether or not the former president of the United States, who I think we can all finally agree was cognitively impaired. I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign. I digress on that. But the president was raising the point that did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge? And that's not just the president or me raising those questions, Caitlin. According to the New York Post, there are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents. And so I think it's a question that everybody in this room should be looking into, because certainly that would propose perhaps criminal or illegal behavior if staff members were signing the President of the United States autograph without his consent.
Biden is on the record talking about issuing preemptive pardons to these people.
But was he aware of his signature being used on every single pardon? That's a question you should ask the Biden White House.
Is there any evidence on that he wasn't aware of it?
You're a reporter. You should find out. Okay, Sean.
Whoa, tiny. That's better. That's worse. All right, there we are. So Caitlin Collins is given a mission to go find out whether or not there is any evidence that Biden was or was not aware that the Autopen was being used to sign pardons. It's so funny to watch it all unravel, honestly, but it is unraveling, and that part we can be very happy about. Now, let me check the chat for just a moment. I thought I saw, yes, Beachbound 904, $5, lest we forget APL. It's the best part of the day, to be honest. Anna Paulina Luna as Una Panuna Banca. Let us continue. This was the big news over the weekend, and we discussed this at long length on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday night. John Harold and I did. And so I would suggest, if you are interested in this particular issue, you should go and have a listen or a watch over there, Badlands Media on Rumble. And by the way, while you're at it, if you guys use YouTube, even if you don't watch this show on YouTube, but if you use YouTube, if you have a YouTube account and you can take 2 seconds to go over there and hit subscribe on the I'm Your Moderator channel, that would be a big help to me so that I can fortify against, well, my YouTube strike is, I think, expiring today. And if you hit certain follower numbers, then you're actually eligible for different parts of the YouTube model, like accepting super chats if people over there want to contribute to the show, etc. So the follower number actually has to increase for that. The YouTube channel had no content on it till about a month and a half ago. So if you are able to take 2 seconds and do that, that would be a big help to me. And as I said, I'm going to drop the channel link in the chat. I think you should just be able to go to, oh man, now I'm really messing things up. I'm messing up my ability to find my own channel. It's incredible. It's just youtube.com/@I'mYourModerator. I guess they do the @ symbol there. And so I just dropped that in the chat. If you're able, that would be a big help. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go on. This is NBC News from over the weekend. This is Saturday. Judge expands temporary block on Trump's plan to use the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans. So we are talking about the very scary, very dangerous Tren de Aragua, those people taking over apartment buildings in Colorado. A federal judge on Saturday temporarily blocked an effort by President Donald Trump to use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport suspected members of a Venezuelan gang he is accused of unlawfully infiltrating the country. He also ordered any deportation flights carrying those subject to the presidential proclamation to return to the United States. And we will get into the update on that. Of course, those planes did not return to the United States. Trump on Saturday invoked the rarely used wartime authority, accusing Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua of infiltrating Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's regime, including its military and law enforcement apparatus, perpetuating irregular warfare within the United States and using drug trafficking as a weapon against American citizens. Pardon for 1 second. Sorry. I'm trying to prepare this piece of information we're going to go through in just a moment. And I realized that I grabbed one link, but not the other. So sad. So sad. Okay, here we are. Perfect. So that's all set up. Let's go to the White House. This is the official invocation of the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States by Tren de Aragua. And so we went through a big chunk of this on Devolution Power Hour the other night, but I want to focus right on Section 1 and Section 2 of this order. So Section 1, I find and declare that TDA is perpetrating, attempting, and threatening an invasion or predatory incursion against the territory of the United States. TDA is undertaking hostile actions and conducting irregular warfare against the territory of the United States, both directly and at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. And I would suggest that it is not the Maduro regime doing that, but who he is directing this responsibility toward is largely irrelevant. I make these findings using the full extent of my authority to conduct the nation's foreign affairs under the Constitution. So he is making it very clear right away. This is absolutely under my authority as president. Based on these findings and by the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, including 50 U.S. Code, Section 21, I proclaim that all Venezuelan citizens 14 years of age or older who are members of Tren de Aragua are within the United States and are not naturalized or lawful permanent residents of the United States are liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. I further find and declare that all such members of Tren de Aragua are, by virtue of their membership in that organization, chargeable with actual hostility against the United States and are therefore ineligible for the benefits of 50 U.S. Code 22. I further find and declare that all such members are a danger to the public peace or safety of the United States. And so there's a few things that we need to think about when we're talking about these international criminal gangs or cartels that have come here. First is Donald Trump, in one of his immediate moves, becoming publicly recognized as president for his third term, was to classify the cartels as terrorist organizations. And in response to that, what we had were articles from the New York Times and I assume many other outlets suggesting that making the cartels terrorist organizations and then for having the ability to freeze their finances, etc., would disrupt many of the legitimate businesses that the cartels were also involved in because they are too interlinked. And that is part of the system. Okay. Whether the businesses are doing things that are criminal and could then be prosecuted under RICO, perhaps even RICO Grande, or whether cartel members are buying into businesses or starting businesses themselves or infiltrating businesses through the employment level and working their way on up, it wouldn't matter. Those businesses are now interlinked. Okay. Anything from a hotel to a pharmaceutical company. All right. If the pharma companies are taking some of that black market heroin, opium that was harvested in the poppy fields of Afghanistan, for instance, under the supervision of the United States. And then that shipment is moved, and part of it goes to the pharma companies as an input for their opiates that they make, which is how opiates are made. Well, then the pharma company and the cartel are obviously linked. And then the cartel, of course, pushes the rest of the product to the street level. So you have street crime as a result of that drug trade, the cartel processed drug trade. And you have the pharma companies in line with the same series of crimes. And we can go down the list on, shipping companies, manufacturing companies, what's coming in on those same ships. Okay. Are humans being trafficked on those ships while auto parts are also coming in? We heard about the Wayfair thing. I don't know if that's true or not. Okay. But we can at least understand that as a potential model for how things operate. So the businesses are interlinked, and there are people who are representatives, probably powerful and prominent representatives of polite society, that are nonetheless the leaders of businesses or organizations intimately involved, interlinked in their operations, their criminal enterprises, with what we more commonly would immediately recognize as criminal enterprises, these street gangs and the cartels that support them. So we have that problem there. And of course, they control politicians as well. They fund the campaigns of politicians, the global philanthropists. I've said many times that these cartels are essentially just the private armies of the global regime. They don't need to control nations to use these armies. They have them just out there in the territories, wreaking havoc, taking over neighborhoods, entire cities, governments. A lot of people think that Arizona's government is run by the cartels. Is it? I don't know. Seems like it probably is. They certainly have very corrupt elections there. They certainly have very corrupt politicians there. And the state's going in the direction of other border states that have massive problems with illegal aliens and massive problems with their government and its legitimacy. So we have the problem of cartels being linked to straight to businesses and straight to these politicians, which immediately takes an executive order like this and expands its scope. We should understand that the scope is expanded and can cover people who are not like the gang members we see in media coverage, like the MS-13 tattoo-faced neck, everything. Those are not the only characters that are associated with the cartels. The cartels are now terrorist organizations. That also means that their finances can be frozen. So if the cartels are interlinked with big business and the cartel finances can be frozen because they are classified as terrorists, well, does that extend to that big business? And if it does, what liability, what exposure does that big business have? And if people were to find out that there might be more exposure, and insiders were to find that out before other people were to find out, might there be an insider sell-off that would crash the markets upon these sorts of understandings? And I would suggest that potentially there would be. Now, it also would allow then Donald Trump to classify as alien enemies people, presumably, connected to these organizations that may well be in an American government, but have a dual citizenship or something like that. Just another factor that may well be in play. All of these things should be considered in the scope of these executive orders, because they are bigger than just a handful of gang members. Let me see which order I decided to do this in. We're going to come back. No, let's do this. Okay, so let's go to section 2. I direct the Attorney General within 60 days of the date of this proclamation to prepare and publish a letter under her signature declaring the policy described in section 1 of this proclamation as the policy of the United States and attaching this proclamation. I direct the Attorney General to transmit this letter to the Chief Justice of the United States, the Chief Judge of every Circuit Court of Appeals, the Chief Judge of every District and Territorial Court of the United States, each governor of a state and territory of the United States, and the highest ranking judicial officer of each state and territory of the United States. And this immediately reminded me of Trump's executive order from February 18th. We discussed this at length on the podcast about the independent agencies and the removal of these independent agencies. Now, at some point here, just find this. I wish I had found it before I shared this screen with you. I hope I'm on the right one. I am. Hold for processing. Hold for my brain to be processing. Where are we? I just showed this off the other night. Ah, here we are. Sorry, all the way down at the bottom. I did not think it was all the way down at the bottom. Section 7 of Trump's executive order ensuring accountability for all agencies of February 18th, 2025. The President and the Attorney General, subject to the President's supervision and control, shall provide authoritative interpretations of law for the executive branch. The President and the Attorney General's opinions on questions of law are controlling on all employees in the conduct of their official duties. No employee of the executive branch acting in their official capacity may advance an interpretation of the law as the position of the United States that contravenes the President or the Attorney General's opinion on a matter of law, including but not limited to the issuance of regulations, guidance, and positions advanced in litigation, unless authorized to do so by the President or in writing by the Attorney General. Okay, so at that point, we talked about how Donald Trump was making it quite clear that as the sole plenary authority of the executive branch, his opinion on the interpretation of law overrides any opinion of the FTC or the SEC or the FCC or the EPA or the Department of Education or anything else. However, the heads of those organizations or the employees of those organizations might believe the law can be interpreted in a way that benefits them and the further implementation of the global regime's agenda, the Uniparty's agenda here in the United States, it's all irrelevant. It comes from the President and the Attorney General and absolutely no one else. So the President is now having the Attorney General submit to all of these courts and all the governors, all the states and territories, that whole list of people. This is the position of the President of the United States of America. So if you are going to go against this position, then you are going to go against the President of the United States of America. And to do that, if you are the Congress or the Senate, the Congress or the judiciary, the legislative branch or the judicial branch, then you are doing that in opposition to the President. And is Donald Trump preemptively saying that your opinion will hold no sway over how I operate on this matter? The language of the Alien Enemies Act is plain and clear, and some of this has been presented at length by my friend Patel Patriot, John Harold. We went over some of that over the weekend. But just to direct you to a couple tweets from John, this is from March 15th, so Saturday. I bet we hear the Campbell v. Clinton case cited often over the next few weeks. If you've been following my work, you've been hearing about it for 3+ years. Importantly, the court made clear that it would not dispute the president on measures necessary to repel foreign aggression. The president alone must determine what degree of force the crisis demands. Okay? He's citing now Campbell v. Clinton. The court made clear that it would not dispute the president on measures necessary to repel foreign aggression. The president alone must determine what degree of force the crisis demands. Okay? Now, let's go to one other building block here. And this is a longer video, but this is about a 5-minute video. I posted it on my social media over the weekend, and I know John reposted it. This is also included in our discussion on Devolution Power Hour. So I'm not going to belabor this, just point it out and go through it quickly, and just listen to Donald Trump here at the beginning about being in a state of war.
And I'll also invoke immediately the Alien Enemies Act to remove all known or suspected gang members. We have tremendous numbers of gang members. MS-13, the worst gangs in the world, they say. Before we defend the borders of foreign countries, we must secure the border of our country. It's very simple. I will deploy the U.S. Navy to impose a fentanyl blockade.
Okay. So that was from September 25th, 2023. And then we had a discussion about that. Again, I would suggest checking in on Devolution Power Hour from Saturday night if you want to hear the rest of that video. So it is Donald Trump's sole authority. Even the courts have backed this up. There is precedent for it. He doesn't need the court precedent, but it's helpful. It is under his sole authority to deal with the foreign aggression and determine what level of force is necessary to deal with the crisis. So we have that. It is also one of the questions is, are we in a state of war? And Donald Trump happens to be the person, the sole authority for declaring that as well. Now, Congress will declare war against another nation if we are going to go to war against another nation. But if we are invaded and the president is protecting the homeland, which is his number one sacred duty under the Constitution as commander in chief, that's all him. If he says the country is invaded, that's the only person with the authority to make that decision. Now, the people could rescind their mandate at that point and make it clear that they do not believe an invasion has occurred and that the president, if he moves forward, is operating without the mandate of the people on that issue. The Congress could potentially attempt to impeach the president, but the Congress isn't responsible for declaring that we have been invaded and then responding to it. That's the president. The judiciary isn't responsible for declaring that we've been invaded. That's the president. So there was this thread over the weekend covering the case that evolved after Donald Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. Actually, let's get to that thread in 1 second. I want to play Donald Trump's, just editing on the fly today. I want to play Donald Trump's clips from the plane. Here we are. This is the first one.
The administration, actually speaking of orders, violate Judge Boasberg's order and sending back the Venezuelan gang members and not bringing the plane back?
I don't know. You have to speak to the lawyers about that.
Violate Judge Boasberg's.
Speak to the lawyers.
So the question is, did Trump violate the order to turn the planes around by not having turned the planes around? He said you're going to have to speak to the lawyers about that.
Are you planning to do more deportation?
I can tell you this, these were bad people. That was a bad group of as I say, hombres. That was a bad group. When you look at them and you look at the crimes that they've committed, you take a look. You don't get any tougher. You don't get worse than that. You understand that. So, but you'd have to ask.
That's number one. Let's go to number two. Hold for processing.
Sir, there's been some criticism that the Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked 3 other times. They were all during times of war. Do you feel that you're using it appropriately right now?
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals. Murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion. They invaded our country. So this isn't, in that sense, this is war. In many respects, it's more dangerous than war because, you know, in war they have uniforms. You know who you're shooting at. You know who you're going after. These are people that came out. They're walking our streets. We have thousands of murderers that Biden and his incompetence, first of all, he's grossly incompetent, but that Biden and his people and his probably Autopen, it looked like we had an Autopen for a president.
So he says that we have been invaded and that we are in a time of war. He is the sole authority in the American government and, importantly, the commander-in-chief of the American military. He's the only person who can decide that. There's no one else to decide it. It's Donald Trump. And he's telling the people the decision now. If the courts disagree with that decision, it's irrelevant. There's no constitutional ability whatsoever for the courts to prevent Donald Trump from doing his duty as he sees it. So this is a thread from Inner City Press on Twitter, and this is Threadreader app. Here we are. So they're talking about the temporary restraining order that that the judge is attempting to place here, and that the ACLU is requesting. And this is the conversation back and forth between Judge Boasberg, who I guess was a Yale roommate of Brett Kavanaugh. Very interesting. Important to understand as we go through this. He asked how he shall define the class, the group of people that the ACLU is looking to protect here. He said, we can submit with the date of the proclamation. We're concerned they might extend this to MS-13. So why not any proclamation that names a non-state actor? So the argument started as you can say that you're being invaded by Venezuela, but you can't say that you're being invaded by Tren de Aragua because that's not a state actor. Very clever. That would be quite a distinction, wouldn't it? Not that it matters in reality, but an interesting argument. And we may see that play out in the future, that groups of non-state actors can be identified this way as invaders. The judge says, does the president's authority extend to invasion or predatory behavior? This is a question of first impression. There's helpful law review. So tell me why, given the lack of authority, should I find that the president has authority? I think this is the assistant U.S. attorney, says, in the case cited, a German 3 years after the war challenged his detention and lost. The president has the authority. Judge Boasberg responds, look at footnote 17. Doesn't it leave open judicial review? And keep that in mind. The assistant U.S. attorney says this is reserved to the political branches. The ACLU says the German case, war had been declared and had not been declared over. Boasberg responds, does this proclamation mean that Tren de Aragua is part of the Venezuelan government intent on predatory invasion? It refers to a hybrid criminal state. another interesting factor. And maybe that's why Trump included Maduro, who is really not the enemy here. But one of the, let me skip down here. I don't want to go through this whole thing. There we are. The ACLU says we can dispute whether immigration can be considered an invasion. Boasberg says these are not easy issues, so why shouldn't the TRO continue? That's temporary restraining order. Maybe there are some national security issues you haven't told me. The status quo is to keep them in ICE custody. And so the idea here is, and let's just do one more. The assistant U.S. attorney argues that this question cuts to the core of the president's authority, war powers, immigration, and conducting foreign policy. This is a Youngstown Steel situation, and that is a very interesting case, but we will not go into it now. So they are arguing that illegal immigration, which is what they are classifying all of this as, they're not suggesting that these people were brought in by the American government or by corporations or anything else intentionally. We are just keeping the illusion that has been indoctrinated into most of the American public for decades now, that these criminal gangs from south of our border are illegal immigrants who just so happen to be criminals, but are just coming here for a better life. So this is an immigration problem, not an actual invasion. Again, very clever by the regime, and a clever argument to try to distinguish and say that non-state actors can't be qualified as an invasion, because then they can just invade us through other means. Why wouldn't an adversarial state bent on destroying our country, destabilizing our country, send this sort of hybrid, soldier, not obviously necessarily, at least, an actual soldier in a war effort, but someone who can be guaranteed to disrupt and destabilize American society, potentially murdering, raping, trafficking drugs that might lead to deaths, shootouts in cities, hits carried out by essentially the mob, which we don't like to imagine is what some of these murders are. But of course, it seems like that's definitely the case sometimes. So would that accomplish the same goals that a war might be waged to accomplish? The answer is yes. And now we have the ACLU arguing that we are not allowed to see it that way. The president, as the sole authority to make these judgments, is not allowed to see it that way. And that the court has the power to stop the president from seeing it that way. And that's what he mentioned about judicial review. So we have, can immigration be invasion? Well, yes, an invasion. There's no other person besides the president who has the capacity and the authority to declare an invasion. It is his judgment about what an invasion is. And so if this is an invasion, this is how Donald Trump sees it, as an invasion. I think he's absolutely right about that. They're saying this can only be in a time of war. But if the country is invaded and the president recognizes it as an invasion, then we are in a war. And it turns out Donald Trump has also said we are in a war. And so then the last question after that is about the judicial review. And we will, let's move there in just a second and wrap up the halting of the planes, as it were. This was reported by Politico on Saturday. This is the story that goes out to the American public. It's not about whether the judge has the power to do this. It's just that a judge did it. Federal judge halts deportations after Trump invokes Alien Enemies Act, as though the federal judge can stop Donald Trump from doing this. The mechanism is just there. The federal judge has made his opinion known. And by opinion, this means he has kept a temporary restraining order in place for 2 weeks while the case is being argued. Okay, so the people flipping out about this. I think maybe going a little bit too far. Yes, the judge is clearly not professing a proper view of the Constitution and the president's authority under the Constitution. He is going along with judicial review. There's no enforcement mechanism, but the communication to the American public is going to be that the federal judge stopped this, which then means that if it happens or it continues to happen, well, then somebody is actually usurping power from the courts. Donald Trump is causing, therefore, a constitutional crisis. And here is Boasberg's quote: "Any plane containing those folks that is going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States, however that is accomplished. Make sure it is complied with immediately." Who is going to do that? Skipping down. The temporary restraining order granted by Boasberg will expire in 14 days, which he said would be enough time to litigate the legality of Trump's order. He set a further hearing on the merits of the case for late next week. Today was a horrific day in the history of the nation when the president publicized that he was seeking to invoke extraordinary wartime powers in the absence of a war or invasion and claiming virtually unlimited authority to remove people from the country. But tonight, the rule of law prevailed, said Sky Perryman, president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a national legal organization. Oh, a national legal organization? So again, this is some guy's opinion that there is an absence of war and invasion. It's not some guy's opinion that overrides the president. It's the president's opinion that overrides literally all other opinions if we are involved with a government under the Constitution. And of course we're not, so that's a different thing. But we have to play it. I believe that the entire program is to play things by the rule book of the original Constitution, to never violate the original Constitution in any way whatsoever. Okay. But understanding that the Constitution as it is understood by the regime is not actually in play right now. Okay. Maybe it's easy to say that that we're in a post-constitutional order right now. Steve Bannon says that. I've said it a number of times. I understand that a lot of you probably agree with it. I guess it's possible to consider that actually needs to be flipped around and understand with the understanding that this is the first time we have been under a government that complies with the original Constitution, the first time in any of our lives. So certainly some guy's opinion does not matter. And I thought, was this the one? There's a Mark Zaid comment somewhere. So funny. But skipping down, those targeted under the wartime law would be swiftly deported and would not be allowed to have an asylum interview or an immigration court hearing. And again, that's 50 U.S. Code 22. Their ability to seek to appeal to the courts and to the rest of the system if they believe they've been done wrong. Trump in the executive action, the presidential action, said that because they are considered members of this gang, of this terrorist organization, they do not get these benefits that other immigrants would otherwise get. There's so much urgency here and so much harm at stake, said ACLU attorney Lee Gellert. The government appears to be moving planes very rapidly. Our understanding is that planes are going right now. And those planes did in fact land. This is the president of El Salvador, or, so we are told. This is the man that is shown to the world as the president of El Salvador. And hey, he seems like a great guy on Tucker Carlson's show. And he's a Bitcoin guy, which is pretty cool. Nayib Bukele on X, formerly Twitter. Today, the first 238 members of the Venezuelan criminal organization Tren de Aragua arrived in our country. They were immediately transferred to CICAT, the Terrorism Confinement Center, for a period of 1 year, parentheses renewable. The United States will pay a very low fee for them, but a high one for us. So El Salvador is going to hold these criminals in prison. The United States is going to pay them to do that. It's a very small amount of money for the U.S. relative to our nation's size and our budget, but it is a substantial amount of money for El Salvador in relation to the size of their country and their budget. Over time, these actions, combined with the production already being generated by more than 40,000 inmates engaged in various workshops and labor under the Zero Idleness program, will help make our prison system self-sustainable. As of today, it costs $200 million per year. I really wish StreamYard would fix this feature so that I wasn't the tiny screen on the side. On this occasion, the U.S. has also sent 23 MS-13 members wanted by Salvadoran justice, including 2 ringleaders. One of them is a member of the criminal organization's highest structure. This will help us finalize intelligence gathering and go after the last remnants of MS-13, including its former and new members, money, weapons, drugs, hideouts, collaborators, and sponsors. As always, we continue advancing in the fight against organized crime. But this time, we are also helping our allies, making our prison system self-sustainable, and obtaining vital intelligence to make our country an even safer place, all in a single action. May God bless El Salvador, and may God bless the United States. And you will remember that El Salvador has cleaned up the gang problem in their own country. It's something like 60,000 gang members were all rounded up. Did El Salvador do that on its own? That's a question that's worth being asked. They are now going to hold these Tren de Aragua members, we are told. Let us go quickly to some subjects that we addressed a couple of weeks ago. I think maybe at some point in January, about these Venezuelan gangs and the most based and hilarious dictator, aside from the Rocket Man, President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. This headline, where did it go? Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro claims Biden moved Tren de Aragua into the U.S. Okay, we went over this speech. I will not play it again, but to read Maduro's comments here, I say to President Donald Trump, with respect, ask for the reports of the last 4 years from the FBI and the DEA, from the offices in Colombia, so that you can see, President Trump, who financed, who moved, who directed the famous Tren de Aragua, who brought it to Colombia, who brought it to the United States, and for the truthful reports, and ask for the truthful reports so that you know that here in Venezuela, we defeated, dismembered, and put an end to that violent criminal group that tried to be used from Colombia with deep ties to the former Biden administration to bring terrorism to Venezuela. And he goes on there. Let's just skip to one other Maduro-related article. This is from telesurenglish.net. President Maduro accuses FBI and DEA of creating and protecting notorious Venezuelan criminal gang Tren de Aragua. He said they are protected by the DEA and the FBI. As we speak, they are protected. Okay? This was from, where's the date on this? February 21st, less than a month ago. So the FBI and the DEA and the former illegitimate, fake and illegitimate Joe Biden administration are responsible for not only creating Tren de Aragua, but for bringing them to the United States. And now they are being removed. And the ACLU and Democracy Forward, etc., are trying to make sure they are not removed. Now, who is being removed? That is one of the most important questions, if not the most important question. And John and I discussed this as well on Saturday night. This is just Wikipedia here. Okay. Due to the enormity, let's start just a little bit earlier. Tren de Aragua is led by Hector Rustenford Guerrero Flores. He was incarcerated in Tocarón prison, which functioned as the organization's de facto headquarters. Due to the enormity of its crimes, combating the gang has become a priority to many nations where Tren de Aragua has operated. Though Tocarón prison was taken by Venezuelan security forces in 2023, the leadership escaped, and the gang's activities are currently ongoing. So, the FBI, the DEA, and the fake and illegitimate Biden administration are responsible for creating this gang that operated out of a prison in Venezuela. And we are told, and for bringing them to the United States. Now, who did they bring to the United States? Presumably, it's the leaders of this gang who escaped that prison. So the people they're trying to make sure can't go back to Venezuela or El Salvador or wherever they are sent seem to be probably just logical deduction here. And I understand it might be wrong, but probably the higher ups of that organization and the people toward the top of that cartel, of that terrorist organization, interlinked with powerful companies here in America and our government, clearly, if Maduro is to be believed. And it's very probable that Maduro is to be believed. Maduro is certainly a more trustworthy source than our global regime's state media that we are told are actually just a bunch of independent media outlets like CNN and the New York Times. All right, let us continue. So let's go back to judicial review. And I will recommend, as I often do, that everyone subscribe to the podcast Path to Liberty by the 10th Amendment Center and hosted by Michael Bolden. It is an excellent podcast. They go through on a very regular basis. He goes through the writings of the founders, and not just the founders that we were taught about in our public indoctrination centers, the anti-federalists, people prior to the founders, people from after the founding era like Lysander Spooner, who are analyzing what the intent of the government actually was, what the authority of the Constitution actually is, etc. It is excellent. One of the many issues that they cover, of course, is judicial review. And so let's just go through this quickly. Judicial review, as established in Marbury v. Madison, 1803, from 1803, is the power of federal courts to declare legislative and executive acts unconstitutional. This landmark decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice John Marshall, fundamentally shaped the American legal system by asserting the judiciary's role as the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution. That's not how it is. The principle of judicial review allows courts to examine the constitutionality of laws passed by Congress, strike down laws that violate the Constitution, review executive actions for constitutional compliance. The written nature of the Constitution, according to Marshall, establishes it as the supreme law. The judiciary's role inherently involves interpreting the Constitution when deciding cases. The supremacy clause of Article 6 implies judicial review. So this justice decided, it was his opinion, that part of the Constitution implied this power to the courts to be able to strike down the executive branch and the legislative branch. And now we are all taught this as part of the original intent of the Constitution. This is the court's check on legislative and executive power. This decision strengthened the federal judiciary by establishing its power to act as a check on the legislative and executive branches. Although not explicitly stated in the Constitution, judicial review has become a cornerstone of the American legal system, allowing courts to safeguard constitutional principles and maintain the balance of power among government branches. That's not in the Constitution. That is something that John Marshall and the Supreme Court in 1803 in Marbury versus Madison took it upon themselves to give themselves, thus making the court a more powerful authority than the legislative branch or the executive branch, when all the court is empowered to actually do is give its opinions. I said, is it constitutional? The machine told me, yes, it's constitutional. The key aspects that make it constitutional, judicial review, are the written nature of the Constitution, the judiciary's inherent duty, and the supremacy clause of Article 6. And so I said, so that's an opinion that it's constitutional. Are there opinions that it isn't? Yes, there are opinions that judicial review is not constitutional. While the previous answer presented the view that judicial review is constitutional, there are opposing arguments. 1, lack of explicit constitutional basis. 2, the undemocratic nature. Some argue that judicial review undermines democratic principles by allowing unelected judges to overrule decisions made by elected representatives. 3, overreach of judicial power. Opponents contend that judicial review allows judges to impose their values and preferences on legislation and executive actions, potentially overriding democratic decisions. And of course, that's true. Historical misuse, and it cites Dred Scott. Undermining legislative intent. Some argue that judicial review allows judges to substitute their judgment for that of the elected officials, potentially undermining the intent of legislation. And some scholars suggest that the Constitution's judicial power and supremacy clause do not necessarily imply the power of judicial review as it is currently practiced. And I forgot to share my screen. I apologize for that. So, judicial review allows judges to override the executive and legislative branches. And to the extent that they're unelected, they're unaccountable. To the extent that they're appointed by unelected officials, which is what happens now, and they serve life terms, that makes them further unaccountable. And so we have a government that is antithetical to the government described by our founders. This is an inversion of the original intent of the Constitution. And this inversion is what supports the other inversions. The court has no enforcement mechanism whatsoever. It has no basis in the Constitution to have an enforcement mechanism. All it can do is render opinions on the constitutionality. The people are the ultimate authority on all of it. It is within the people's purview in a legitimate system to withdraw their consent, to withdraw their mandate from the government, at which point the government should be abolished, as Thomas Jefferson recommended. But beyond that, the understanding of the founders at the time was that anything, and by the way, it's in Marbury versus Madison, which is funny, that anything repugnant to the Constitution is void. The founders agreed with that. If what you are doing is in violation of the language of the Constitution, there is not anyone anywhere who must abide by the new policy. The president, the Congress would be treasonous were it to pass laws that violate the Constitution. The president would be treasonous to sign into law that which violates the Constitution. There's a process for amending the Constitution, and if that process is not conformed to, then whatever it produces is null and void from its inception, just through the act of nullification. It is up to us not to comply with that which is unconstitutional. It's up to us. if we comply, then we are giving our consent to an illegitimate government to violate the Constitution in our name and make us subject to whatever violations they choose. And again, I would strongly recommend listening to Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center in the Path to Liberty podcast. He has been all over this the past few weeks. A Rumble rant in the chat. Maggie D8, $17. Sorry for being unruly. I did not know that you were unruly. And I see your question about Michael Bolton. Well, it's Michael Bolden, D-I-N, if I am not mistaken. Not Michael Bolton, the singer. And not Michael Bolton from, what was it, Office Space? The movie Office Space? One of the characters was named Michael Bolton. It was often compared to the singer, Michael Bolton. You know what we should do? We should maybe, oh, very weird. How strange. For whatever reason, there are no Rumble ads today, so I guess we do not need to do one of those. Okay. Let us continue to march forward. Jack Posobiec had an interesting point, and I know that as soon as you say Jack Posobiec, people will start talking about how much they hate Jack Posobiec in the chat, and that's all good. I know that Jack Posobiec was in a Q post or something, and now his information is therefore null and void forever. Information among other information, my friends. Also, Poso seems to be a purveyor of the correct narrative, though maybe not at all times. I don't know his intentions. I don't know his affiliations. But of all the people who are considered Con Inc. grifters pretty widely, he is the one I do not mind for whatever reason. I don't know. Got a soft spot for Poso, I guess. He said Article 3 of the Constitution does not lay out any enforcement mechanism for the judiciary to restrain the executive. It is Article 2 where the executive must, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, end quote, and swear an oath to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, end quote, not the judiciary. In the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton was one of the guys on like the regime side of things. Like he wanted a bigger centralized federal government. Okay. The exact wrong direction, the direction that has brought us to where we are today. It is him here making this argument. He describes the judiciary as the least dangerous branch, lacking the sword of the executive or the purse of the legislature. This is in Federalist number 78. He argues it depends on the executive to enforce its judgments, suggesting a relationship of persuasion rather than command. This aligns with the English common law tradition where the courts advised the crown but lacked coercive power over it. The Constitution's framers, wary of centralized authority after the Revolution, intended a similar dynamic. The judiciary could warn the executive of unconstitutional acts, but the ultimate accountability rested with the executive's oath and the people's elected representatives as outlined in the Constitution explicitly. So I would contend, actually, let's do one more clip and then we'll from the plane and then we'll wrap this up.
Do you plan to comply with the judge's order regarding rehiring the federal workers?
What are you talking about?
The Clinton appointee judge that ruled that the federal government has to rehire the fired federal workers. Do you plan to comply with that?
Well, I think it's absent. I have nothing to do with that other than I heard about the decision. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely. It's a judge that's putting himself in the position of the President of the United States, who was elected by close to 80 million votes. And you have that. You're having more and more of that. It's a very dangerous thing for our country. And I would suspect that we're going to have to get a decision from the Supreme Court. But
It's a very dangerous decision for our country. These are people, in many cases, they don't show up for work. Nobody even knows if they exist. And a judge wants us to pay them even if they don't know they exist. If they exist. And I don't think that's going to be happening, but we'll have to see. I don't know. You have to speak to the lawyers about that.
Mr. President, did the
So, as you clearly heard, that is not related to this particular immigration issue, but again, another element of the judicial review. Can the judge stop him from firing federal workers? Or is that judge usurping executive authority? And the answer is, of course, the second one, as Trump just admitted there. So we seem to be headed on a collision course for the end of judicial review, I would suspect. I cannot imagine there is any way that Clarence Thomas would be supporting judicial review. Let's find out. Let's ask the machine at least and see if the machine has anything good to tell us. Has Clarence Thomas given any opinion about judicial review? And I will share this. There's no specific record. He has consistently argued against judicial activism and expansive interpretations of constitutional provisions favoring a limited judicial role. So apparently we have not, or at least the machine cannot currently find, an opinion from Clarence Thomas rejecting judicial review, but it seems like that's where we are headed. And I would suspect that Clarence Thomas would agree that judicial review is an overstepping of the court's constitutional authority and must be removed. A judge cannot decide that the executive, the plenary authority of the executive branch as president, cannot fire workers in the executive branch. Okay? It's that simple. He is the plenary authority of the executive branch as outlined in the original Constitution. Any actions Donald Trump takes in that direction will always end up with this result at the end in the Supreme Court. And if it doesn't, then it's the people's mandate that matters after that point, because the court has no enforcement mechanism. And you have to think about this going on down, and you can relate it to criminal trials. All court proceedings were supposed to be jury trials, so that the jury of the American people, who were meant to be a representative sample of the American people, could weigh in not only on the matter before them, but on whether or not the law as written itself was constitutional, and therefore a law that mattered, a law that was passed and mattered by the people's legitimate representatives with the mandate of the people, of, by, and for the people. And so you can go down and look at a criminal case in a state. The judge can deem someone as guilty, but then there still has to be an enforcement mechanism for imprisoning that person. And you take the decision away from the judge. It is for the jury trial, for the jury in the trial, I should say, to determine not only whether or not the person's guilty, but whether or not the law itself should stand. All of these things are always decisions that ultimately rest with the people. And the people have to assert that level of power, or else their consent, as far as the government is concerned, as far as the regime is concerned, is implied through their compliance. It is, again, up to the people to understand these things and declare these things. And that requires a shift in the way we perceive ourselves in relation to our government. We're not subjects of that government. The government is our agent. They are meant to act on behalf of the people, according to the will of the people, with a structure that can provide an enduring system. If that's just given away to whoever claims they've won an election, and the people go along with it, and the people obey those rules and laws because they're worried about getting audited or worried about being thrown in jail, well, then you've made yourself a subject, okay? Not only did the founders say it, but it's explicit in the Constitution what the government's allowed to do. If the government does more things than it is allowed to do, then it's violating the Constitution. It can't do those things. We must nullify them immediately through our noncompliance. Okay, let us continue. Rumble Rant, Team Smooth, Puck. What fools these mortals be? Me? Cue up the music. Oh! And I'm Polino Luna. Ask and you shall receive. You shall receive. Okay. Man. I was thinking about getting into some Russia-Ukraine stuff. Donald Trump, by the way, is going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin tomorrow. That is what we are told. Trump also did say that on the plane. And they are going to be talking about, actually, let's just do that in real short order, just as a preview. And then we'll focus some time in the subscriber stream on Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. on Substack for paid subscribers and on Rumble Premium for people who are paid Substack subscribers and also on Rumble Premium. Okay? That is the way to watch the Wednesday show. There is no other way to watch the Wednesday show. And then the Wednesday show will replay on Sunday. So let's just do this Trump Putin clip, and then we'll get into some talk about the spacemen.
We learned a lot. We're doing pretty well, I think, with Russia. And we'll see if we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
What sort of concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get a deal done?
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the war, as you know. And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. That's up, that's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working.
So we're going to talk about land. We're going to talk about power plants. That would be the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And he said it's already pretty much been decided. It was also decided a really long time ago. And it's been that way for a really long time. Zaporozhye has been under Russian control the entire time. The Donbass and Crimea are only Russia now and have been for years. It's already determined. It's already been determined the whole time. Everything we're seeing in these negotiations is a show to explain to us what is happening and to create sentiment among the people that what is happening, the way things will be legitimate. And we don't want to go to war with Russia to protect Ukraine. We're going to have to come back to that on Wednesday. I have so much stuff from last week on the Russia-Ukraine thing, but I cannot resist talking about the spacemen. We have Gilligan's Island in Space, a television show that has been playing out over the course of like 9 months or something. This is from the Financial Times last week. And this is the part that kind of strikes at the underlying importance of the story. Stranded astronauts rescue mission lays bare Boeing's struggles in space. U.S. astronauts Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore are finally due to return to Earth this week, ending a 9-month mission on the International Space Station that was supposed to last 8 days. But this time they will not be using a Boeing Starliner spacecraft as originally planned. Instead, as Williams said last week in a rare briefing from space, we will be riding the Dragon, a capsule made by Elon Musk's SpaceX. The switch marks a strong endorsement of a vehicle that has become the workhorse of ISS crew and cargo missions and a humiliating reminder for beleaguered Boeing of the troubles that have beset its space division. So we have Boeing being replaced by an Elon Musk company. And we have a number of companies and military contractors being replaced by Elon Musk companies. And we are getting a series of largely psyops to convince us why that is necessary. We have the Boeing psyop that everybody is aware of over the last few years about Boeing jets failing in this way or that way, and it's always because of DEI. Then we have a problem with air traffic controllers, and it's always because of DEI. And Elon's got to use Starlink and figure out how to fix things for the air traffic controllers. You can search and find those headlines. A military contractor, Boeing, that is one of the biggest companies in the country for many decades, is being replaced by SpaceX for these reasons. They've messed up the mission to bring these two people, these two spacemen, back. So we have to keep in mind that we are getting these stories to manufacture our consent for these things to be controlled by Elon Musk. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it seems like Elon Musk and Donald Trump are aligned. He was back there at the White House last week. Little X just running around. I guess little X, just Elon's son, hangs out with Trump now. Are the interests aligned? Maybe. Hopefully. Definitely hopefully. Are there good ways to interpret the manufacturing of our consent through these info ops? It's a tough case to make. We should be given the truth. If we were having a government of by and for the people, which I'm not entirely convinced is even possible, at least not with a federal government that resembles the one we have now for the size of country that we have now. And, you know, that'll be a discussion for the future for certain. We should be told the truth. In an ideal situation, we would be told the truth. We are not being told the truth. We are being shown a series of stories to manufacture our consent for what is to come next. Now, if this provides a glide path for a whole range of projects, services, whatever it might be, to be removed from the federal government where they absolutely do not belong and be reprivatized, then maybe this is all an acceptable manufacturing of our consent. Otherwise, it's pretty weird. We can hope that things are going in that direction because Starlink, of course, or SpaceX or whatever company is always going to seem like a private company to the public, whether or not it's a defense contractor, just like Boeing seemed like a private company. But if NASA's duties then all shift into SpaceX, then we are moving the governmental control over space exploration to private companies. Why would a federal government be doing space exploration? So strange. It really is so strange to think like the original Constitution is this thing. And now we have like these people on rocket ships sponsored by the government. So crazy. Let's continue. Donald Trump said this like a week or so ago in the Oval Office, talking about Sonny Williams or Suni Williams.
But maybe they'll love each other. I don't know. But they've been left up there. Think of it. And I see the woman with the wild hair, a good solid head of hair she's got. There's no kidding. There's no games with her hair. But
and it really is so ridiculous how these people are commonly shown on the footage that we get that is supposedly from the International Space Station. And here's what Trump is talking about, in case you're not familiar with how this woman is generally photographed. Of course, we always have to be shown that these people are in zero gravity. That's how you know, no matter what, that all of this is real and they're in space. See that? The hair, they're just floating around here. They're not hanging upside down. They're not hanging upside down, even though his face is getting red and his vein is bulging out and his cheeks seem to be going in the direction that gravity would not suggest. You can look like that if you're hanging upside down from a pull-up bar or something, but they're not doing that. They're just in zero gravity because they're in space in the International Space Station, and all they've done is moved by floating around for the last 9 months. So Trump's referring to her hair, making that an even bigger joke. I don't know how it could be a bigger joke. It's a pretty big joke, but yeah, so very strange on that. Trump pointing it out. Here we have astronauts ready to go save the spacemen on the International Space Station. All right, there they are, ready to save. It's almost time for liftoff. Look at those chairs and those amazing boots. Why do they need boots? Why do they need these kinds of boots? Oh, I'm sure there must be a very, very scientific reason, and it's not just like space fashion. Okay, let's see some of this process. Here we have liftoff.
At any moment, let's launch.
Ignition and liftoff. Go SpaceX, go NASA Crew 10. Copy, 1 Alpha.
And liftoff of Crew 10 now soaring to the International Space Station. 1.7 million pounds of thrust now propelling Falcon 9 and Crew 10. We're continuing to get good call-outs on the first stage performance so far. We're now 40 seconds into today's flight. Power and telemetry nominal. Continuing to get good performance call-outs.
Throttle down.
Yeah, we are throttling down the engines in preparation for Max Q. What great timing that was. We just passed through Max Q. That's the largest structural load that the vehicle will see on ascent.
Vehicle supersonic. Stage 1, throttle it.
We're now just over 1 minute and 10 seconds into today's flight, traveling at more than 1,400 miles per hour. And we just heard that call out for 1 Bravo, which means we're in the second and final abort mode for the first stage, continuing to get good performance.
Blast off. It's happening. It's really happening. Every bit of that is happening. It's on TV. It's happening in reality. Okay. The descriptions, of course, let you know it's extra real so that they can share in the science with you so that you know what's happening. It's not just like a massive firework being set off way up in the sky that will then immediately begin arcing over the horizon. It's not that. It's going into space. And hey, man, maybe there's something suspended up there in the sky that's been there for 25 years, orbiting the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour as the Earth hurtles through a black infinite void. Maybe, I guess. I mean, anything's possible, right? Including the impossible, apparently. But let's just do one more of these. This is to really science things up.
Of that boost back burn on that first stage, as well as the MVAC engine igniting on the second stage. Great views there. Now the booster is in its boost back burn. This is the first of 3 burns as it makes its way back down to Earth. This will last about 45 seconds.
Now, you'll notice on the picture, the image, the video there on the right, that we are still employing the aluminum foil from all the way back in the day. From the original lunar lander, we still have aluminum foil on the outside. And it turns out that, you know, we lost the technology to be able to return to the moon for decades now and couldn't figure it out again. But we have retained the aluminum foil, thankfully.
And the crew, 10 crew, is still on board Dragon, attached to Falcon 9's second stage, which you can see there on your right-hand screen.
And we're now at 3 minutes and 20 seconds into today's flight. The vehicle is traveling about 6,500 miles per hour. They are on their way to the space station. And we did have that confirmation coming up of the boost back shutdown. And then coming up at the T plus 6 minute mark. And there we have our first images of the crew inside the Dragon spacecraft.
Look at them. Ah, they're so cute. Okay, so the spaceship launched on Friday. It's not coming back till Wednesday. So what are they doing up there for 5 days? Well, the first part of it is docking with the space station. And there's a process for docking with the space station. And it was outlined in 2015 by Business Insider. Docking with the International Space Station is so insanely complicated, it's a wonder we ever get it right. March 30th, 2015. Imagine being chased by a 925,000-pound machine traveling 17,500 miles per hour. That's what happens when the astronauts dock with the International Space Station. Surprisingly, though, the process can take a lot longer than you'd think. And by the way, if it's blasting off with all its rocket speed at 1,400 miles per hour, as we just heard that news person say, that means when it gets up there and it starts to enter orbit, it goes like 12x the speed. That's got to be jarring. It's a lot to adjust to. These spacemen really have to go through it. 17,000 miles an hour they have to travel up there through a black infinite void because of gravity with the spinning Earth that's hurtling through that black infinite void, also spinning around the non-local sun that is 93 million miles away that they haven't actually measured, but they've estimated, and they have their mathematical processes. And that's as close to science as we're ever going to get from scientists. Although a rocket can transport astronauts into space in less than 10 minutes, it takes hours and even days to rendezvous with the International Space Station. Case in point, on Friday, March 27th, astronaut Scott Kelly and cosmonauts Gennady Padalka and Mikhail Kornienko launched at 3:42 p.m., but were crammed inside of their Soyuz spacecraft for another 6 hours. They didn't dock until 9:36. Okay. So Scott Kelly is Senator Mark Kelly's brother. He's a spaceman. I think Mark Kelly's wife was Gabby Giffords. They're not part of InfoOps or anything. Despite being relatively close, the ISS is traveling at more than 17,000 miles per hour in a circular orbit around Earth. Anything moving that fast, whether in space or on the ground, is going to be hard to catch. As it turns out, the way you catch the ISS is counterintuitive. You actually let it catch you. And so here are the steps they took. We have convenient little GIFs. Okay. So first we have a blast off, and then the spaceship gets into orbit, and it looks like it's chasing the International Space Station, but at a lower orbit. Next, they need to get farther away from Earth and closer to the ISS. They can't just point their spacecraft away from Earth and gun the engines, though, because that would quickly take them out of range of the ISS and into deep space. And it's not because the thrusters wouldn't work in a black infinite void. I don't know, science. So they boost it up and they get a little bit further out. And then they do it again and they get a little bit further out. And then finally, they end up on the same trajectory, and the space station will eventually catch up to them. So the spaceship, it just turns itself around, and then the two of them meet. They fire the engines one last time to slow down. In order, see that burn right there? In order for the space station to catch up. And then they dock. And it looks like this. Oh, you see that? Oh, man. So satisfying when they dock. Here is Elon Musk showing the quote unquote actual docking of SpaceX Dragon with the International Space Station, courtesy of X, formerly Twitter. Oh, it's so beautiful. Look at that. Just flying up over the massive Earth with this. What do they call it? A bird's eye camera? Is it a bird's eye? Somebody's going to be like, no, that's not right. Why can't I think of that? What is it called? Maybe it's a bird's eye. Anyway, someone can correct me in the chat. It is slipping my memory at the moment. So that was the docking video. We're about to save those spacemen. And before we show you them being saved, let's go to Elon Musk himself.
What was going through your mind? How amazed were you to see your roadster up there with Starman just cruising along with the Blue Planet? And how long will we be getting live views, do you think, from the car?
Well, I think it looks so ridiculous and impossible. And you can tell it's real because it looks so fake, honestly.
You can tell it's real because it looks so fake. Here's CNN. SpaceX's Crew 10 arrives at the ISS, paving the way for NASA's Wilmore and Williams to return home. Their coverage is just exceptional. By the way, carried out with Crew 10 astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Myers of NASA, Takuya Onishi of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. So we have to make sure that we are properly DEI'd on that crew. These are not DEI hires, though. These are merit-based hires that just so happen to also fit DEI qualifications. Beautiful pictures here. The massive rocket ship is blasting off into the sky. Here is the crew doing a photo shoot in their special spaceman suits. Look at them. Oh, it's great. What great suits they have. Who designed those? Here is an image. A long duration photo was taken at night from the orbiting laboratory as it soared 258 miles above Western China. It looks like R2-D2 and a blurry linoleum tile. But hey, it's got to be real because it looks so fake. Here are pictures of those two people who are stuck up there in space and have been for months and months. There she is with the hair, always with the hair. They're happy people, you see. Yes, they've been doing Gilligan's Island, and they haven't fallen in love. Fisheye lens, PJ Corrigan says. And that's exactly what it is. Of course it is. What was I thinking? Now, let's get to the good part. When you're like, ah, yes, they're definitely saved. All the hugs, says NASA's Johnson Space Center. The hatch of the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft opened March 16th.
The first Crew 10 astronaut.
And let's pause that for 1 second. March 16th at 1:35 a.m. Eastern, and the members of Crew 10 entered the space station with the rest of their excited Expedition 72 crew. Now, if you were my friend G Money, you would say, how about that? That's a covfefe signal right there, 1:35 a.m. Now let's listen to the description of what's happening. Here is that crazy looking lady with the wild hair. Here is some, you got just astronauts all over the place here. This one looks like a blueberry.
Through the hatch.
Oh, that's because there's two of them right there. They were hugging.
Followed by Peskov.
What an embrace. All the hugs.
Nicole Ayers, the first of the flies newest class of astronauts to enter, and last commander of Crew 10, and McLean.
That's really something. Okay. So as soon as they get up into the airlock, once they have docked, that is presumably when they change out of their totally irrelevant spacesuits and into their business casual gear. Now they're ready to hang out on this space station for a few days. So all the hugs. So says NASA's Space Center. Now, it wasn't only those astronauts who came onto the ship. There was also an alien. Oh, no. Now, you see, that was a Russian cosmonaut with an alien mask on. I guess that gets us more hits on the video. It gets more people to watch it, gets more people to accept the central narrative about all of this. Let's watch them move around, just so you know that all of that is 100% real and could never be faked in any way. This was one of the last journeys to space that was had. Apologies for some reason, this link. Here we are. Hold for processing. Oh no, a fire. I bet she wishes she had one of those spacesuits right now. She's doing all of this because there's no gravity on the space station, and they're filming this on the space station. So that is the movie Gravity, and they definitely do not shoot the International Space Station stuff on the set from Gravity. That's the real International Space Station and not the one in the pool in Florida. That's the real one. And they filmed the movie Gravity on that space station. I'm just kidding. Of course, they modeled the set for the movie Gravity to look exactly like the very real space station that, of course, these astronauts have entered. They sent a whole bunch of astronauts. Now there's like 12 of them up there. 12 of these spacemen up there on the space station, and we are hopeful that they will be able to return on Wednesday. At least 4 of them will be able to return. They're going to go back in, I guess, the Dragon, and they're just going to hang out there for 4 days, kicking it with Butch and Sonny. Let's have a look here at, where did my crazy astronauts go? Oh, gosh. These crazy astronauts are a must. I cannot pass up on these guys. It must be shown. So apologies. Holding temporarily for processing. Goodness gracious. Have I lost them completely? No, there they are. Wonderful. Let's put the first one up here so you can have a look at this. Check out these astronauts. This is a still from the hugs. And I just want to zoom in because I think this is so funny. I mean, hey, man, some people are like, this is all definitely real. Of course, this is real. They would never do something this elaborate, forgetting about everything that's happened in the last few years. But check the Japanese guy out. First of all, it's impossible to look more two-dimensional than that. His face is hysterical. But also, what in the world is this back here? This looks like a hook that is potentially attached to a wire system, the kind you might find in a film studio. I don't know what to say about that, but it does look quite strange. So the Gilligan's Island episode is now presumably coming to an end. I guess we'll have to see ultimately. Donald Trump addressed this on Truth Social just this afternoon. I just spoke with the acting administrator of NASA, Janet Petro. She is coordinating our team of highly respected scientists, space engineers, and various other quote unquote geniuses who has agreed to let our astronauts come home long prior to the 2-week period originally approved by NASA. Janet was great. She said, "Let's bring them home now, sir." And I thanked her. This began when I asked Elon Musk to go up and get the abandoned astronauts because the Biden administration was incapable of doing so. They shamefully forgot about the astronauts because they considered it to be a very embarrassing event for them. Another thing I inherited from that failed group of incompetents. Elon and I have taken on the project, sending up the SpaceX Dragon, which has successfully docked, and hopefully, while there is always danger involved in such a mission, they will soon be on their way home, taking off tomorrow and landing on Wednesday. Exact times will be provided to you. Safety always comes first, and maximum standards are being adhered to. But after 8 long months for a mission that was supposed to be 8 days, it is time. I look forward to seeing Butch and Sonny, and thank you again to NASA and Janet Petro. So I guess all's well that ends well. What else can we say about that? And I guess on a line like that, it's probably time to wrap things up for today. I will be back on Wednesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Let you down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.